Okay, the session is on recording now. Right. I've shared the screen too. Okay, how many of you have come read? Okay, Adina Tariq has come read. Who else? I don't know if you're unable to find the icon or you have not read. Anyway, I've already told you that in these online classes, in any kind of learning, you should be responsible for your own learning, but more so in these online classes because, the teacher cannot check you in a way we could while we were in the classrooms. Let's start today's lecture. So in the previous lectures, we had been talking about language teaching methodologies and then how these three terms in LTM, such as approach, method, and techniques, can be differentiated. We just touched upon those differences. I also asked you to research on these terms, and some of you really did so, and I appreciate that. Today we are going to look at approaches from the theoretical perspective. Okay, so we will talk about approaches in terms of theories of learning and theories of language learning, right? So basically, when we define approach in language teaching methodology, let me add some more of the participants. Okay. So when we talk about approach in language teaching methodologies, we basically refer to the theories. Okay. What kind of a theory? That stay consistent with the method, or there has to be compatibility within the theory and the method chosen to teach the second language. And in our scenario, in Pakistani context, is usually teaching of English as a second language. So approach refers to those theories about the nature of the language and language learning. And these approaches serve as a source of practices and principles in language teaching. Okay, so basically approaches are theories, right? Approaches are established theories that helps in the developing of a particular or of a certain method, and through these approaches practice and principles in language teaching take place. Okay, we teach language through certain principles and practices that are underpinned by certain theories, and these theories are basically approaches. When we are teaching in our classrooms, especially, of course, in this particular case, we are teaching second language or English as a second language. So there are certain theories which are basically the approaches that we take. And through those theories, we come up with certain methods. There has to be compatibility between the method and the theory. And this is how we look at approach in language teaching, right? So sometimes these terms can be interchangeable, approach and method, but basically as students of linguistics, we need to know the difference between approach and method. So approach is basically an established theory, right? And today we are going to look at these theories in two ways. One is the theories of learning, which are general theories, okay? Whatever someone is learning, it can be related to the general kind of theories. The other theories are theories of language learning. We're going to look at both of these. Some of the theories we touched upon in the previous lecture, but we'll talk about them again, and we'll connect them to the theories of language learning also. Okay, Now, when we talk about LTM, we talk about the linguistic and psycholinguistic aspects of approach. And again, to simplify things, we take approach as theories, right? So there are two ways of looking at this approach. One is theory of language, and the other is theory of language learning, right? So one is the linguistic approach, the theory of language. Okay, this is the linguistic approach, and the other is the theory of language learning. This is the psycholinguistic approach. Okay, um, and theory of language learning um, is applicable, and all the theories of language learning are not taken from the field of linguistics. They may be taken from the field of psychology, they can be taken from the field of sociology, and they are integrated into the language classrooms, but of course they are the theories of learning. Okay, so we are going to look at, first of all, we are going to look at the linguistic aspect of approach, which is called as the theory of language. We've already discussed the first two. There are three views related to theory of language. The structure view of language, okay? Then they say there is a functional view of language, and then there is an interactional view of language. By view, again, we mean theories, and by theories, we mean approach. So one is the structural approach, the other is the functional approach, and the third one is the interactional approach, right? So the methods that are based on structural approach, what they view language as, they view language as a system of structurally related elements for the coding of meaning. Okay, so in structural view of the language, or in structural theoretical view of the language, or in structural approach of language, the focus is on structures. Okay, and any method that is developed through this approach would pay more attention on the structure of the language, right? And by structure, we means the related elements that gives you meaning. For instance, how a sentence is constructed and what meaning does it give, right? So the target of language learning through the structure view of language is the mastery of elements of the language. The method that I ask you to read, the first chapter that I asked you to cover from the other book, is about grammar translation method. And this method is developed on the structure view of language. You perhaps must have noticed that the target or the aim of the teacher is to um, make the student learn the structure of the language, to have the mastery of elements of the system. By system, we mean the language. Okay. Now, this system of language, when we talk about the elements of language, the system of language based on structures, we are talking about the phonological units. Okay. Probably you have done phonology, and you have an idea of phonemes, right? So my question is, what are phonemes? Quickly put this in the chat section. What are phonemes? Quickly, I need 2-3 good answers, and then we move forward. What are phonemes? Let me put it in the chat also. Okay, we are getting answers. Yes, that's correct. This is the smallest unit of sound. Okay, right. You know about this. And similar is the case with, the morphemes also. Those are also structures, right? clauses as structure, phrases structure, sentences as structure. These are all grammatical units. Okay. Now, what happens in this grammatical units? There are grammatical operations also, and even in phonological units, there are operations like adding, shifting, joining, transforming elements, right? If you have studied morphology, we know that morphemes can be dependent morphemes and the independent morphemes, right? So this is about, then we also talk about suffix and prefixes. So this is adding and deleting and joining and shifting and transforming of elements of the lexical items where the meaning changes, okay? Whenever you add a prefix to a word, true and untrue, the meaning changes, okay? So when the meaning changes, the coding of the language also changes, and the structure of the word changes, and similar is the case with its, of course, its function. Now, there are some function words and there are some structure words. There, as we call in grammars, there are some content words and there are some words which are not really functional. For instance, the prepositions. Okay, prepositions are not content words, right? And proper words come in function words or the content words. Proper dictionary words are function words or the content words, whereas other structures that help in joining these words are not, content words, right? Those are perhaps function words, I guess. They are content words and they are function words. Function words serve the function of connecting the content words, right? So basically what you need to know as students of LTM, that there is a structure view of language, and on this structure view there are a number of methods that approach language teaching through this view of language. And the aim of a teacher while using the structure view of language or teaching through methods that take up structure view of language is to make students proficient in the structure of a language, okay? And if we take structure of the language in simple terms, it basically deals with grammar, morphology, and phonology, okay? So the units that we talk about in the structure view of language are phonological units and the grammatical units, or the grammatical operations and the phonological operations that you have already done perhaps in morphology and phonology. How the sound of the word can be changed by adding or deleting a phoneme or merging of the phonemes. These are all phonological processes. Let me, okay, there are some more girls. Please, these latecomers, be on time. You interrupt the lecture. Okay. Now let's move to the second view, to the second approach, the functional view of the language. Now, if I give you example, we have not started doing the methods, but you'll have some idea by the use of term communicative approach, okay? Now, in the functional view of the language, or the functional approach of language, it views language as a vehicle for expression of functional meaning, okay? In a structural approach, we are not concerned with the functional language can produce. The focus is only on the structure, while in functional view or the functional approach of the language, we try to teach students to use language for particular functions, for expressions, okay, for conveying the meaning. In a structured view of the language, the teacher's concern is not to teach meaningful language, The concern is to make the students learn the grammar of the language. But here in the functional view of the language, the focus is on the spoken language. Let's put it this way. Okay. So this approach is related to the communicative movement in language teaching, and it came quite late in the history of language teaching methodologies. While we would be doing these methods, communicative approach is almost the second last method, and it was the result of the functional view of the language, and it was like there was a communicative movement in language teaching that subscribes to this view of language. Now, this theory or this approach or this view of language, it stresses upon the semantic and communicative dimensions. Of course, you know, semantic, it refers to the meaning of words. Okay, the meaning become more important, and the students look at language as something functional, something that they can use for communication. So communicative dimension becomes very important in this view, and grammar takes the back seat. Okay. They believe people who approach their classrooms through this functional view of the language believe that through communication the students can learn grammar by themselves. Okay, through proper structural sentences which are useful in conversation, the students would learn grammar automatically. So grammar is not the focus of teachers who try to teach English as a second language through this functional view of the language. And this functional view is important for communicative purposes. Okay, so the focus doesn't remain on grammatical characteristics of the language. So in the functional view of the language, of course, the syllabus differs from the syllabus of structural view of the language, right? So there are, they go by categories of meaning and function rather than, structure and grammar. So here we can say that approach affects the method, and method, of course, affects the technique, right? As we differentiated between the three terms, we came to know that techniques is related to the exercises, practices, drills that language teachers, do with their students. So the content, the syllabus, the course, everything would be different according to the approach that is taken up by the teacher in a classroom. In structural view of the language, the language will be taught through segregated, separated sentences. Okay, as I've already given you examples, that 10 sentences would be given to the students, and they would be asked to find out tenses or convert active to passive voice, direct to indirect. Now those 10 sentences are not linked up. They don't have anything to do with one another, and those might not be the functional sentences also. Okay, so, and they do not even perform the function of communication, right? The teacher writes these sentences down on the board, and students are not engaged in any speaking activity. It's just a written kind of an exercise that even does not improve their written expression. Okay, it might improve their knowledge of the grammar, the elements and the structures in the language. Whereas in the functional view of the language, the content might be like delivering dialogues. Okay, dialogues are given to the students in context. Context is very important in functional view. Okay, situations are created where the students are asked to speak in the class. Okay, so because the two teachers, one has taken a structure approach, the other has taken a functional approach, a lot of things change. Their method would change. One might be teaching with grammar translation method or the audiolingual method, and the other would be teaching with a communicative approach. Okay, and therefore their techniques would be different. Because of the approach, the method varies and the technique also becomes different, right? And the third theory of language is the interactionist view of language. Now, this is the newest of the views, I would say, newer than the structure and the function view. Now, it sees a language as a vehicle for realization of interpersonal relations and for the performance of social transactions between individuals. I already told you this approach in combination with the functional approach is used by language centers, okay, because they see language as a vehicle for interpersonal relationships. You need to talk. Language is only for talking. Language is only for expression. Language is only about getting things done through communication, okay, for your social transactions, for buying and selling of things, for your daily life routine. Language is used. If someone, for instance, imagine someone goes to Germany and he doesn't know the language, but he knows the structure of German language. He would not be able to go around his daily activities because he is unable to interact with people. He is unable to realize interpersonal relationship. He is unable to perform social transactions, right? So only to know the grammar, or maybe to know the function of a few sentences, would not make a person very functional in a society with a different language. So anyone who wants to be functional in a society needs to know the language for its purpose. Okay, how do you greet in a particular language, right? In Urdu and English, we greet in different ways. How do you exit a conversation? How do you end a conversation? We end the conversation differently in Urdu and English, and perhaps in your own local languages. Greeting and ending the conversation is very important, right? Even if it's a telephonic conversation, it should be properly started and it should have a proper ending. Okay, right. Um, Other than that, you need to know how. What do you say when you have to buy something? What do you say when you go to the bank? How do you talk to the teachers? How do you talk to your fellows? How do you interact with the members of your family or with other families? So all this comes in interactionist view of the language, right? Um, Basically, the term also tells you interactionist view is related to the interaction amongst the people. Now, this has been a researchable area, and from interactional approach to language teaching, we have developed certain methods of data analysis also. Okay, whenever you collect data through interactions of the people, I don't know if you have done research methodology or you would be doing it this semester, but anyway, some of you would qualify to do research. I think students who score 70% on research methodology would be doing thesis. Anyway, when you collect data, okay, from general common communication of people, okay, conversations, let's put it this way. So there are certain methods of analysis. Since interactional view of language is a newer view as far as theories are concerned, so a lot of research is taking place with the help of this view of language. And there are a number of methods of analyzing data through this particular theory, through this particular approach, right? So whenever you collect data of people conversing, general conversations, for instance, phatic communion, I don't know if you know this word of phatic communion. You'll be taught this in pragmatics, if that's your course this time. I do not have an idea. Anyway, fata communion are general kind of conversations. Those are not meaningful conversations. Okay, for instance, asking someone about weather, you don't mean to actually know about the weather update, but just to it's basically a British culture. When people are sitting together, they do not know each other, just to keep the conversation going, they may ask for weather. You may ask for someone's health. For instance, when you ask how are you, usually the acceptable answer is I'm fine, whether someone is fine or not fine. But according to the rules of fata communion, you say that you're fine. Anyway, if you're collecting data of that kind, or if you're collecting data from any of the conversations, then there are certain methods of analysis that are given to you by interactionist view of language, such as interaction analysis, conversation analysis, ethnomethodology. Okay, ethnomethodology is related um, to getting to collect data from culture view of the language. Okay, you collect data from certain cultures and then you study them through ethnomethodology. Now, these interactional theories, okay, or these interactional view of language, what is their focus? For instance, structural view, the focus is on the structures. Functional view, on the function of the language. Now, the interactional theory focus on the patterns of moves, acts, negotiations, and interactions that are found in conversational exchanges. Okay, so how do people, it's about the body language also. It's about how people move from one topic to another. Acts, acts of greeting, acts of saying goodbye, acts of inquiring, okay, acts of answering. Negotiations, how do you bargain? How do you talk to one another? How do you settle down your disputes? It all comes in negotiations. Okay, and then the interaction that is generally found in conversational exchanges. So all of this is covered through interactional view of language, how people act in certain situation, what are their acts, okay, how do they, and what conversation goes on when they are angry, when they are happy, when they are sad, when they are negotiating, settling down their disputes, moving from one topic to another, how does the topic shift takes place. All of this comes in the interactionist view of language. Okay, now what happens is the teaching content according to this view would be different. The content would be organized by pattern of exchange and interactions. Okay, those would be specified also, and those can be unspecified also. And the teacher has to find out the interests of the students, what kind of interactions would really interest your students or your classrooms or the culture that you are teaching, right? So if you are debating about, for instance, in your culture, if you ask your students to talk about Vani, Vani, you can ask your students to talk about parda in this particular culture. So interactional view of language really brings in culture to your classes. You are teaching another language, but you may use in interactional classrooms your own scenarios also and your own situations. But this is not the case, as I've given you the example of Streamline, which is an American language teaching book, right? Now, the kind of interaction that is taught through that book are American kind of interactions, right? There are beach parties. We don't have beach parties. Then the kind of wedding conversation that is given in these books, we don't have that. Okay, so language center probably try to teach the culture along with the language. This is also perspective, whether to teach the culture along with the language, or we only need the students to know the language. Here in Pakistan, our aim is not to teach another culture or the culture of the British or the Americans. Our aim is to bring students to learn English as a second language for academics, to converse whenever and to enable the students to read whatever like, teach culture along with the language. Okay. Now, moving on, I hope this is clear. If you have any questions, you may leave them in the chat section. If I get time at the end of the definitely answer those. Other than that, you can ask these questions in the email also. I'll put down my email here shortly, and then you can do the questions. Time of online classes is already short, and some of your class fellows enter the classrooms very late, so we have to wait for them, and we have problems. Okay. Now, happens that when we are designing a method, structural function or interactional model of language that right, they actually, these three theories of language provides us with theoretical frameworks, and these frameworks lead us to particular teaching methods. Now these language or complete in the be complemented by language learning theories, right? So these three theories that we have looked are language theories. These are not language learning theories, but these are language theories, and these are combined with language learning theories that we are going to do now. And then a certain kind of method involves. So language teaching, you just not need to take only one approach or one theory. You can teach with a combination of it. It really depends, nothing be said for sure. You need to look at your class, you need to look at syllabus that is given to you, how much space is given to you to improvise those syllabus, what kind of method you can apply, what kind of techniques you can for your students. So it really depends, and you can I think go by combination. But what the linguists believe, these views or these language theories are not complete. They are complemented, or they need to be complemented by theories of language learning. Okay, so do not get confused between theories of language and theories of language learning. Both of these are theoretical frameworks and help in designing certain approach, or the approach to language teaching based on one of these, or or maybe a combination of these. While we will be doing language methods one by one in detail, so we will look at what method takes up which language theory and which theory of language learning. Okay. Okay. Now, we have already done this in the previous lecture. We touched upon that a learning theory underlying an approach or a method, it responds to two questions. Okay, so approach is underpinned by a theory, and this theory answers to questions. And these are the questions that are asked by the teacher. What is their requirement in the classrooms? Now, the first question that these language learning theories answer is, what are psycholinguistics and cognitive processes involved in language learning? What are the conditions that need to be met in order for these learning processes to be activated? Okay, so we are going to talk about the processes, the psycholinguistic processes, the cognitive processes, and then the conditions that need to be met for these processes. Okay, I've already told you about some of the psycholinguistic processes that go in the learning of the language, right? Now, I've already told you that language, these learning theories are associated with a method, and they may emphasize both the processes, the psycholinguistic cognitive processes and the conditions that need for these processes to take place. Okay. Okay. Now, process-oriented theories are built on language learning processes such as habit formation. I gave you the example of stimulus response, that is habit formation. And I don't know how many of you have a science background where you have read Skinner's theory and his experiments. Okay. So for your homework, I would like you to read about Skinner's theory, right? And I would like you to read about behaviorism. And that is how we link habit formation. Okay. When there is stimulus, there is a response, and there is only one response. And if there is no other response, and there is nothing between the stimulus and the response. You do one thing, your students would provide you with a certain answer, and there is just one answer, one correct answer. Okay. And they cannot have their own views about the answer, but just one answer. So this is habit formation. Other than that, there is induction and deduction. Those are also processes. I would like you to find these out, the difference between induction and deduction. Let me put it in the chat also. Students are gone because there were issues of the light. There should be something that the students who have entered once should be entered automatically. There shouldn't be any interruption in the lecture. Okay, I'm putting some of the questions down for your homework, but I'm not leaving. We'll continue with the lecture. Okay, I'm just putting down some of the questions in your chat. Many people are not following the homework, that you don't come up prepared. You're not doing the homeworks also. This is one of the, these are two processes, learning processes, okay? And these are different, two different learning processes. Then I would like you to find out Skinner. I would like you to read about behaviorism, okay? The lecture is on record also, right? Okay, so these are the some of the learning processes. For instance, habit formation. You make certain habits in your students. Whenever you would ask one question, they would give you one single reply. Okay. Inferencing is just not getting the meaning of what is being said, but understanding the meaning beyond the words. Inferencing, understanding, interpreting. Okay, so basically when you interpret, you just do not understand what is written or what is said to you, but beyond what is being said. For instance, the whole field of pragmatics, by the way, is about meaning more than what is said. For instance, when I ask you to switch on the fan, so you infer from my sentence that the room is warm. Okay, if I ask you to open the windows, you would not say why the windows should be open, or any other question. You would not put any other question, but you would just open the windows, inferring that the room is getting suffocated, maybe. Okay, so this is one of the processes of learning. Then hypothesis testing is related to research. Okay, you are given a hypothesis. For instance, girls are better readers than boys. This is a hypothesis. Okay, and you need to test it, right? So this is hypothesis testing. Generalization is when you find out certain results and then you generalize it. For instance, when you are testing hypothesis that girls are better readers than boys, then you can generalize these results that all girls are better than boys. Okay, Pakistani girls are better than boys in reading, or the European girls are better in reading than the boys. So this is generalizing. Specifying is if you specify to a particular area that the girls of this particular area are better in reading than the boys. But then generalization is that you apply the result to a large population. Okay, you just say that girls anywhere in the world are better readers than the boys. This is called as generalization. Okay, so these are process-oriented theories, and these some of the learning processes are these. Okay. Other than that, there are condition-oriented theories that emphasize the nature of the humans and physical context in which language learning takes place. So when we talk about condition-oriented, we mean the physical context in which you are teaching, in which the language is being taught. Okay, what are those physical conditions where which vary from one classroom to another, from the classrooms of one culture, from another culture, or classroom because of different backgrounds of the students, right? So when the condition changes, then the language learning processes also change. Now for that, I would refer to Krushen. Okay. Now Krushen has given certain conditions on language learning. I would also like you to read Krushen. Okay. Put this in the chat. Even I've entered the girls. I don't know if there are some more. Okay. I would like you to read about Krushen, right? Do you have a class after this class? Okay. Okay, read about Krushen, right? Now, what Krushen says is he has given a monitor model of second language learning, right? Now, according to this monitor model, Krushin distinguishes between acquisition and learning also. Okay, it's Chester's class after this. Okay, I'm just winding this up. Now, I was talking about the conditions or the condition-oriented theories, and Krushin has to talk about these conditions. I've told you that conditions might vary, okay? And according to those conditions, you have to select certain approaches which might not be functional in other kind of conditions, right? Now, Krushin has talked about these conditions where he has differentiated between learning and acquisition, whether the students are actually acquiring or learning the language. This is one condition. The other thing he has talked about is the monitor hypothesis. Okay, if you go through, we'll discuss this in detail tomorrow about Krushin monitors hypothesis, and we'll also discuss about +1 hypothesis, that when students are given something that they do not know, but that doesn't become too difficult for them, so then you are providing conducive condition for the students to learn. Okay, so these are some of the conditions that Krushin has talked about. I expect you to read about Krushin, right? And to do also read about things that I've left in the chat. I think we have a class tomorrow, and I hope that all of you will have done some research on what I have asked you to do. Okay, so you may go for your next class, but before that, Eamon, you may take a picture of the participants. We have 30 participants right now. You can take their picture, and I'll see you tomorrow, and I hope you will come up read, right? So you can go for the other class now. Let me check the chat section also. You're unable to download video lectures. I'm trying to sort this out. I don't know if I can really drop it here. And then one more thing is recording takes some time, right? While you will be leaving the class, the recording would be processed. It is not ready immediately to be posted here. Okay. So that's why. But I'm trying to sort this out, how to put the lecture on LMS. The LMS has its limitation to 20 MB, and the lecture is, bigger than that. I'm trying to put this on my Google Drive and then share the link with you. But let's see how this can be done. Okay. But please try to take the lectures, those who are in Quetta and have access to the internet and can come to the classes. So it's important that you take the lectures.